Dear brothers and sisters, welcome to our 33rd Sunday of the year. It's the ordinary Sunday, and the ordinary time has 34 Sundays. And the 34th Sunday, which is next Sunday, is the feast of Christ the King. So on this 33rd Sunday, which is the penultimate Sunday of the year, we have a beautiful teaching from Jesus. Jesus is teaching his people, and he gives them a beautiful parable. The parable of the king who's going on a long journey, and he calls his servants and he gives them talents. He uses the word talent because in those days it was money. But for us, it means using the gifts that God has given us. So as we come to the end of the ordinary Sundays of the year, we need to look at the gifts that God has given us and how we have put them into practice. So therefore, this Sunday is going to be dedicated to our fidelity, to faithfulness. And that is what my homily today, my meditation is all about. It is the call to be trustworthy. The call to be trustworthy. Am I trustworthy with the gifts that God has given me? So the word talent today, for you and for me, means the gifts that God has given us. So, talent, do we really understand what talent is all about? To a certain extent, yes, we do. And this is what somebody said about talent. I believe talent is like electricity. We don't understand electricity, but we use it. So you and I may not understand the gifts that God has given us, but we use our gifts. In fact, constantly we are using our gifts. So in order to understand this beautiful parable and teaching of Jesus that Jesus is giving us now for this Sunday's gospel, I have 5 little points that I'd like to meditate with you on. The first one is, the Lord is the giver of life and of gifts. What a wonderful God we have. We have a God who is life himself and who gives life. And in giving life to all of us, he gives us his tremendous gifts. Because in order to live life, we need his gifts to bring up that life and to make it fruitful and to make it loving and peaceful for all of us. And therefore, God is the giver of life and giver of all the gifts. So in your quiet time, look at yourself and appreciate the gift that God has given you in your life. Now, very often, many of us have a lot of problems with our life because we do have problems in life. If there's anybody who has no problem, just let me know and we'll make you a saint overnight. Okay? All of us have problems, and our problems shape us in our response to God. And it should bring us closer to God, because God is the one who's given us life, and the problems that we have, which have come from our own misunderstanding of life or whatever source they have come through, well, we take them to God. And God gives us the grace to understand them and to solve them, to heal them, and to bring forth new life through these problems. So the first teaching is, God is the giver of life and giver of gifts. The second point in our meditation this morning is, we are individuals and yet we live in community. Each one of us is individually made by God, and God has never repeated us any time in the history of our life and the life of the world. So each one of us is unique, and we are made individually, but we are not made individually to be alone. Remember what God said in the first chapter of Genesis. And he said, it's not good for man or woman to be alone. So he made woman as a companion to man, and man as a companion to woman. So we are made for community, even though we are individually made. So we belong to community, and we need to create that sense of community in us. That is why we are all born in a family. And it is in the family that we learn to relate to one another, we learn to build community, we learn to build our families, we learn to love one another in our families. So we may be born individually, and God has made us individuals, but He also made us individuals to be integrated into community. And each one of us also, belonging to Jesus through baptism, we join the faith community. So as individuals, we come into the faith community of Jesus through our baptism, but actually we belong to a community of believers. And that is why we go to our own parish church. Each one of us belongs to a local community, and we are called to invest our life, our time, our talents in this community of faith. So let us remember, the second point in our understanding on the story of the talents is that each one of us is made individually, but we belong to each other in a community. Point 3 in our meditation on this beautiful gift of talents that the Lord has given us is that the Lord has a very high expectation of each one of us. Why does the Lord have a very high expectation of each one of us? It's because He has given us and lavishly given us gifts. Gifts to develop ourselves and gifts to develop the community into which He has inserted us. So now we have a tremendous responsibility for those gifts. And this is what somebody said, your talent is God's gift to you. What you do with it is your gift back to God. So the talents that we have, and each one of us is loaded with talents. It's like a gold mine, the deeper you go, the more gold you will get. So each one of us is like a gold mine of talents. And we need to take responsibility of that and develop it. So now, God has a high expectation of each one of us. And it is His expectation that we should be able to fulfill, because He has given us gifts, and now He expects us to give it back to Him. And it all depends on how we develop those gifts and make use of those gifts, so that what we give back to God is our gift to God for all the gifts that He has given each one of us. Now, the fourth point in our meditation on the gifts that God has given us through this beautiful story that the Lord has told us is that all of us have a responsibility, and a grave responsibility. It's a grave responsibility that has been imposed upon us, because the gifts that God has given us, He has high expectations of us, and He wants us to discover those gifts, develop those gifts, and use those gifts to bring Him glory, not just for our success. Very often, most of us discover, develop, and use our gifts for our own personal glory. There's nothing wrong in it, but if it stops there, then everything is wrong. Because God has given us those gifts not only for our own development and for our own glory, but also for His glory. Each one of us is a sign of His glory, because each one of us is blessed by God, is lavished with gifts by God, and therefore we have this tremendous responsibility to give it back to Him. That is why in 1 Peter chapter 4 verse 10, St. Peter tells us and advises us, each of you should use whatever gift you have received to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms. How wonderful. Just look at that teaching of St. Peter. He says, each of you should use whatever gifts you have received to serve others. So the purpose of God's gifts to each one of us is to serve the faith community to which we belong. And that is why the title of our meditation is to be trustworthy. Am I really trustworthy with the gifts that God has given me in my heart, in my life? And St. Peter goes on further and says, as faithful stewards of God's grace. So each one of us is a steward. a steward with the gifts that God has given us, so that we can bring to fulfillment all the gifts that He has given us for our own personal use, and at the same time to serve others and to give Him glory. All of us have a responsibility in the discovering, developing, and using of our talents. Everyone has talent. What is rare is the courage to follow the talent to the dark place where it leads us. Now, why dark place? Because it requires a lot of responsibility, a lot of ownership. You have to take ownership of your talents and employ it, because you have developed it, you have discovered it, you have used it. Now bring forth abundant fruit in using your talent. So now we come to the fifth point of our meditation. And what is the fifth point of our meditation? That God is not looking for success. God is not looking for success in the use of our talents. Then what is He looking for? He is looking for fidelity, for faithfulness, for trustworthiness. Am I a trustworthy steward of God's gifts, so that when I'm trustworthy, then He can give me more? What is trustworthiness? That God has given us all these beautiful gifts, which we call talents, and now He wants to know whether you're going to use your freedom in bringing about the use of these gifts to develop His community, His faith community, His precious body. And each one of us, as I said earlier, is an individual, but we are also belonging to a community. We are inserted into a community, and therefore we need to use those gifts that we have to develop our talents and bring glory to God. Now our big question is, God is looking for faithfulness, He's looking for our definite joy in using those gifts that He has given us. Listen to what He says in the gospel. You know, at the end of the teaching that He gives us, the man with the one talent comes up and he says, you know, I was afraid of you, and therefore I did not use my talent. I just buried it in the ground. You know what God says in return, or what Jesus says in return? So take the talent from him and give it to the one who has 10. But why give it to the one who has 10? But remember, God is a lavish giver of gifts. So even those who have 10, God wants to give them more. So, He says, for to all those who have more, more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who have nothing, even what they have will be taken away. Now you and I may jump up and say, this is unjust. No, in God's world it's not unjust, because He has given us a responsibility. He's given us the responsibility of using those talents for His glory. So if you and I, out of a lack of courage, out of fear and whatever reason, don't develop our talents, then it's going to be taken away from us. It's like, you know, limbs in our body. If I, for example, tie up my hand like this and walk around for the rest of my life, what will happen to this hand? It becomes useless. It falls off. It dies. So also, when God has given me so many gifts and I don't discover them, develop them, and use them, then they are going to die. And remember, God has a very high expectation of each one of us. And for all the gifts that He has given us, He wants to know what we are doing with it. And that is why this beautiful teaching that Jesus has given us here, for to him who has more, more will be given, and they will have an abundance. So that is trustworthiness. God has given us gifts, He trusts us, and He wants to lavish us with more and more gifts. So the big question is, am I trustworthy with the gifts that God has given me? What am I doing with those gifts He has given me?